had to literally pick her up off the floor and take her into the other room and sit down with her on the couch.
Later that night, David called his father.
I said, she ain't holding the bumper. I would have, you know, they wouldn't have drove off with my kids. You know, I was something when that car would have still been in my hand and he drove off, you know. But there was never any doubt, you know, in his mind that the kids were kidnapped.
I believed Susan. As I've stated before, 100%, completely. Never beyond that I didn't believe her beyond a shadow of a doubt, never.
David, like most people in Union, believed Susan Smith's story. By the next morning, word of the kidnapping had spread rapidly. Many residents would dedicate countless hours to a 9-day search for Michael and Alex Smith. A search that would end not in the safe return of the boys, but in the exposure of a lie that would shock the nation.
On the surface, there was little reason to doubt Susan Smith's story. By all accounts, she was a dutiful and loving mother. In high school, she had been a member of the National Honor Society and was voted friendliest girl by her classmates. But as the search began for the two little boys, the image of their tearful mother pleading for their safe return turned into a sickening lie. Police would later learn that 5 days before the disappearance of her boys, Smith had said to a friend, "I wonder what life would be like if I didn't have kids."
From the moment Susan Smith reported her children missing, a nationwide search began for her car. In South Carolina, officials led by State Police Chief Robert Stewart began a parallel investigation, as is commonplace, in cases of child abduction. They questioned both Susan and David Smith, while following up on other leads about the supposed black carjacker. One of the problems complicating the search was that the description Susan Smith had provided for the composite drawing of the carjacker was so generic, it raised suspicion.
Of course, it had to be acted on because you have children's lives at stake. But over a period of a couple of days, we had some real concerns with that and with the concerns if it was false that it would cause in the community. And we tried to be very careful how we acted on that in conducting interviews of subjects based on her description.
A reporter with WIS-TV in Columbia, South Carolina, Heather Hoops, drove to Union to cover the story.
Discussion started right away about that composite and how vague it was and how it described half the people in Columbia and should we use it and what should be done. And eventually we pulled it off the air.
But the search for the carjacker and the little boys went on, and the residents did their part. They assisted police by printing thousands of missing posters, distributing photos, tying yellow ribbons around mailboxes and telephone poles, and scouting wooded areas on horseback. Local and national media descended on Union and beamed the story around the world. Before long, Susan appeared with her husband David to make a tearful plea for the return of their children.
I can't sleep, I can't eat, I can't do anything but think about them. And I just want to hug them so bad and tell them I love them.
But doubts about Smith's sincerity grew rapidly. On the second day of the search, she took a lie detector test and failed. In an attempt to get a quick confession, police confronted Smith and accused her of being involved in the disappearance of Michael and Alex.
She immediately became belligerent, cursed the agent, and that was the end of it. So we knew she was the kind of person that we would have to very easily work into a confession. You couldn't intimidate her into it.
Nor could the authorities call off the search. Sheriff Wells, the FBI, and police kept on checking the hundreds of leads that came in every day. Susan and David Smith stayed with their families at the home of Susan's mother and stepfather, Linda and Beverly Russell, waiting anxiously for news.
It was very long days, waiting out at the Russells. watching people come in, watching people go. You're like on a roller coaster, up and down, because there's so much hearsay.
On the third day of the search, there seemed to be a breakthrough. A car matching the description of Susan's Mazda was spotted in North Carolina. But it was not her car. In vain, divers searched the waters of John D. Long Lake from the shoreline to 100 feet out. And the FBI searched Susan's house, but came up with nothing. After almost a week of silence, Susan and David Smith appeared before the television cameras once again.
I want to say to my babies that your mama loves you so much, and your daddy, these whole families love you so much. And you guys have got to be strong, because you are, I just know, I just feel in my heart that you're okay, but you got to take care of each other. And your mom and daddy are going to be right here waiting on you when you get home.
As the daily interrogations of Susan proceeded, police discovered inconsistencies in her story. The greeters at Walmart didn't remember seeing her on the night of October 25th. The friend Susan claimed she was going to visit wasn't even home that evening. And there were more.
She said there were no other cars in the intersection, no possible witnesses there, when in fact that light will only turn red for the direction she was traveling if there was cross traffic.
On day 8, Smith changed her written statement when police confronted her with new reasons why her version of the supposed abduction didn't add up.
It was like an elaborate chess match. She'd make a move, we'd make a move, until it finally got resolved.
The national media was now increasingly skeptical.
I would do live shots for stations around the country, and they were asking the question, well, hey, did they think the mom did it? It was a question that was on a lot of people's minds. Susan said things like, I loved them, I really did. Well, that's past tense. I mean, are they dead? Do you know something we don't?
On the 9th day of the search, Susan and David appeared on all 3 national network morning news programs, declaring their innocence and pleading for the return of Michael and Alex.
My first reaction is it hurts to know that that I would be accused or even thought that I would ever do anything to harm my children. As a mother, it's only a natural instinct to protect your children from any harm. And the hardest part of this whole ordeal is not knowing if your children are getting what they need to survive. And it hurts real bad.
Later that morning, Susan met with police behind a local church at a recreation center. Smith, worn down by day after day of intensive interrogations and relentless media scrutiny, finally broke down. It was in this small windowless room at about 2 p.m. on Thursday, November 3rd, that a tearful Susan Smith begged Sheriff Wells for his gun. She told Wells her children were not all right and fell to the floor sobbing. She said that the car and the children were at the bottom of John D. Long Lake. Divers found the car 122 feet from the shore, upside down, under 18 feet of water. Through the murky darkness, the beam of a diver's flashlight illuminated a small hand pressed against the window. As the car was pulled from the water, the bodies of Michael and Alex were visible through the side windows. Back at the church, Susan Smith was allowed to prepare an unusual confession.
They wanted to get something in writing, but they didn't want to get into a situation with a confrontation to the point where they could get nothing in writing. So that's why she was allowed to, at that point, just write out her account of what happened.
In her written confession, Susan Smith claimed that she was suicidal on the evening of October 25th, that she was living in what she called a vale of tears, not wanting her children to live without a mother, Smith said she was planning to kill herself and take her children with her. After driving around Union for over an hour, she pulled into the access road at John D. Long Lake. She let her car roll down the boat ramp, but soon stopped it by pulling up the emergency brake. Later, she got out of the car, released the brake, and let it roll down the ramp into the water. That evening, Sheriff Wells made the shocking announcement.
Susan Smith has been arrested and will be charged with 2 counts of murder in connection with the deaths of her children, Michael 3 and Alexander 14 months.
I was heartbroken. It was a sickening feeling that I've never experienced in my life before. I felt empty. I felt hollow. I felt betrayed.
Later that night, as the car was removed from the lake, the bodies of her 2 children remained in their car seats, grossly deformed from being underwater for 10 days.
South Carolina decided to pursue the death penalty against Susan Smith. Her defense attorney would say that execution made no sense, since Susan wanted to die. And the worst punishment she could face was having to live with what she had done. Back in a moment.
The nation was stunned by the deaths of Michael and Alex Smith. Even more shocking was that the confessed murderer was also their mother. Crime statistics indicate that more than 1,000 children in the U.S. are killed each year by their parents. Susan Smith, having waived her right to a bond hearing, sat in jail as thousands of people streamed into the funeral home for the closed casket visitation of her 2 little boys. On Sunday, November 6, 1994, Michael and Alex were buried, their 2 small bodies placed in the same casket.
It was heart-wrenching. I mean, that was a tough one. I mean, I don't think there was a dry eye. It was 7 miles from the church to the funeral, and by the time we got to the burial site, the cars were still coming out of the church. It was the hardest thing I ever had to go through.
With the arrest of Susan Smith, the town of Union began to mourn as quickly as it had rallied to Susan's side. The yellow ribbons that had been tied to trees and lampposts were replaced with blue and white ones as a remembrance of the boys. The boat ramp at John D. Long Lake was transformed into a shrine for Michael and Alex. Overnight, the love for Susan Smith turned to hatred.
You need to cry!
They were ready to lynch her. I think the whole country was. They didn't have any answers for what she did. They couldn't understand how she would do something like this to their family member, and they wanted her hiding.
Many in the town of Union felt betrayed by Susan Smith, especially members of the African-American community, since Smith had chosen to falsely blame a black man for the crime. On December 12th, Susan was indicted on 2 charges of murder. On January 16th, the Union County Solicitor, Tommy Pope, who would prosecute the Smith case, announced his decision to seek the death penalty.
The state of South Carolina hereby serves you with notice that the state intends to seek the death penalty in the above captioned case, State versus Susan Smith, indictment for murder. Alleged that Susan Smith did in Union County on or about October 25th, 1994, feloniously, willfully, and with malice aforethought, killed one Alexander Tyler Smith by means of drowning, and said victim died as a result thereof. State of South Carolina versus Susan Smith, indictment for murder. That indictment was alleged that Susan Smith did in Union County on or about October 25th, 1994, feloniously, willfully, and with malice aforethought, killed one Michael Daniel Smith by means of drowning. Said victim died as a result thereof.
Smith was appointed a public defender named Judy Clark. Susan's mother and stepfather mortgaged their house to hire a second defense attorney with experience in death penalty cases, David Bruck.
The death penalty is, for her, beside the point. She says over and over again that she wishes she could just die so that she wouldn't have to hurt anymore.
Judge William Howard, who would preside over the case, set the ground rules in a number of pretrial hearings. He started by imposing a gag order on everyone involved in the case and ruling that cameras would be banned from the courtroom.
At the same time, the Simpson case was being tried and had started several months earlier, so we had the benefit of seeing what was going on out there. I felt every time I came into the courtroom that the level of anxiety that I saw was greater than I had seen before, and that it was affecting the way people were addressing the issues, the time that was involved.
The media coverage had been so intense, many believed it would be impossible to find a fair and impartial jury in Union. Under the law, defense attorney David Bruck could have requested a change of venue, but he decided that a local jury would most likely work to Smith's favor.
The prosecution's image of her was of a non-human, a Beelzebub-like character, of just unimaginable coldness and evil. And I thought it would be easier to sell that to a jury of strangers somewhere across the state than to a jury in Union County, because they would be asked to believe that this diabolical figure had grown up in their midst for 23 years and no one had noticed.
Jury selection began on Monday, July 10th. By Saturday, 9 men and 3 women had been chosen. 4 jurors were black and 8 white. Judge Howard sequestered them in a nearby hotel. He had set the stage for speedy and efficient justice. In comparison to the O.J. Simpson criminal trial, which took 9 months to reach a verdict, the fate of Susan Smith would be known in only 17 days.
With the guilty verdict all but inevitable, the real question in the courtroom was whether Susan Smith would face the death penalty. Next, the defense, with a clever move, takes control of the trial.
The trial of Susan Smith began on July 17th, 1995. It might have been a simple one, but the prosecution made what some believe was a major blunder. They decided to try and show why the defendant killed her 2 sons, even though the law did not require that they prove a motive, and they could have won without doing so. Each day, the Union courthouse was packed. Many more waited outside for a chance to get inside.
Not much of a mother. Whatever they do to her can't be enough. Anybody that could drown her babies, any mother could drown her babies, they've nothing to her.
Those who did get inside wouldn't hear Susan Smith speak. State psychiatrists had testified that although Smith was competent to stand trial, she was suicidal and might sabotage her own defense. Under South Carolina law, death penalty trials are divided into 2 parts. The first determines guilt or innocence. The second decides the punishment. The guilt phase of the Smith trial was essentially an open and shut case for the prosecution. In a written confession, Smith had admitted she had let her car roll into the lake with her children strapped in the back seat. There was little chance that Susan Smith would be found anything but guilty.
We didn't feel that there was any defense to the murder charge at all. So the best thing and the worst thing were the same thing, as we felt like there was going to be a murder conviction. The fact that within minutes of this crime she was telling a lie about what had happened to her children made it quite clear that she knew that it was wrong to have killed her children, and that, or at least that she would get in trouble for it. and that's the end of any insanity defense.
But the state wasn't taking any chances.
The defendant had extremely capable attorneys. They would test and they would push against our case. And if they met with resistance, they'd say, well, we're not contesting that. But if it was soft, I can guarantee you they would continue to push right through it. And so part of our job that a lot of people never realized was making sure that every I was dotted and every T was crossed on each and every step.
As part of their thorough approach, prosecutors began the case with a motive. They argued that Susan Smith murdered her children in order to win back her wealthy boyfriend, Tom Finley, who was known throughout Union as the most eligible bachelor, lived in his family's mansion, worked for his father's company, and was Susan Smith's ticket to the good life. Much of the prosecution's case revolved around a letter that Findlay had sent to Smith a week before the murders. In the letter, he outlined the reasons why he was ending their brief relationship. One of them was her children. Findlay wrote, "There are some things about you that aren't suited for me. And yes, I am speaking about your children. I'm sure your kids are good kids, but it really wouldn't matter how good they may be. The fact is, I just don't want children."
When you've got a letter that says, you know, we could be together, but I'm not ready to have kids, I mean, you know, it's pretty clear-cut as I see it.
Under South Carolina law, the prosecution did not need to prove a motive to win a conviction in the murder case. They only had to prove it was premeditated by a mere second. Smith had conceded that in her own confession when she wrote, "I did go part way down the ramp, but I stopped. I went again and stopped. Then I got out of the car. I dropped to the lowest when I allowed my children to go down that ramp into the water without me."
Really, the state was going to get a murder conviction just for showing up. She had confessed to capital murder. We knew that the confession was not going to be thrown out. However, the state made the decision to try to prove motive at the guilt phase. We expected them to do it. We thought it was a mistake, but we thought it was a mistake they were going to make, and they did.
A mistake, according to Bruck, because it opened the door for the defense to present its own counter-argument about Smith's motive. That she was not a cold, evil killer, but a loving, immature, and troubled mother who could not cope with life. That the deaths of Michael and Alex were actually a result of Smith's botched attempt to commit suicide. An argument for which there was some evidence in Susan's past, according to the spokesman for the hospital that evaluated Smith's mental fitness to stand trial.
Susan had been suicidal in high school to the point that she was briefly hospitalized in the psychiatric unit. Her father had committed suicide, and we know that individuals whose parent commit suicide, they're higher risk for suicide. These facts were brought out in the trial. Also, she had depression. It's plausible that she was very depressed that evening. She had been trying to get Tom's attention. He had been turning her off. This was very important to her.
Now that the door had been opened by the state, the defense walked right through it, presenting evidence of depression and alcoholism in Susan's family tree. The impact of her father's suicide when Susan was only 6 years old. And most shocking, the admission of sexual abuse by Susan's stepfather, Beverly Russell, head of Union County's Christian Coalition and chairman of its Republican Party. His abuse had begun when Susan was 15. The most recent incident was 3 months before the drowning of Michael and Alex.
We had the opportunity to show that on the available evidence, suicide was a much more likely motivating factor than a premeditated, cold, deliberate substitution of her children in favor of this remote chance of snaring a rich boyfriend.
So it brought out sort of the good with the bad. It toned it down and made it into a much more complex, emotional case right from the start. instead of allowing the state to portray it in a very stark, evil way and then have the defense try to reconstruct it in a different setting. The defense took control of the case with the state's first witness and never let go of it from that point on.
Because the defense was arguing that Susan's abusive past made her suicidal, but did not make her mentally ill, the prosecution was not allowed to have its own psychiatrists examine her.
That's one thing that makes those abuse defenses extremely difficult, at least under the structure of our law in South Carolina. It's the lack of an opportunity for the state. You know, you're basically using the defense of something unusual in the defendant's mind, but then you don't give us a chance to peer into their mind. It's almost like you putting up a witness and getting to get direct examination, but not allowing me to cross-examine them.
The defense psychiatrist did say Susan intended to kill herself and, quote, take her children with her, a point which the prosecutors really jumped on, saying, well, she didn't commit suicide, and you can't suicide a child. Now, it's plausible that someone could decide to commit suicide and take their children with them. This has occurred in other instances. However, her method here of committing, quote, suicide is very unusual. There are so many opportunities to get out. Now, her kids are strapped into the car seats. I mean, whatever's going to happen is going to certainly happen for them unless she rescues them.
The defense psychiatrist conceded something else about Susan Smith that for some members of the jury proved her guilt beyond any doubt.
His testimony led me to believe, yes, she is guilty. He said that she understood right from wrong. The way she made decisions was not rational, but she understood that it was wrong what she did. So she should be held accountable for what she did.
After a week of testimony, it took the jury only 2.5 hours to come back with a verdict. Guilty of 2 counts of murder. A verdict that didn't surprise anyone. But the defense had won a victory as well. It had presented evidence about Smith that might sway the jury against the punishment the prosecution was so eager to achieve: the death penalty.
To that end, the state would produce an unusual videotape that showed just how Susan Smith had drowned her 2 sons. The prosecutors wanted to prove to the jury that Smith had almost 6 minutes in which she still could have saved them. Back in a moment.
You tell us at aetv.com. On July 24th, the penalty phase of the Susan Smith trial began, with graphic and emotional testimony from both sides. The prosecution, in its bid for the death penalty, would visually recreate the deaths of Michael and Alex Smith. And the defense, in an effort to keep Susan Smith off death row, would use her friends and family to explore the most painful events of her life. The defense also had another argument against executing Smith.
I think it was clear that that life would be a more severe punishment for her because she loved those children. It sounds strange to say, but she did. And the full horror of what she had done weighed on her more heavily than on anybody else. And it was obvious that was going to stay with her for the rest of her life. The longer her life, the more she was going to hurt. And so the idea of the death penalty as retribution didn't really ring true for Susan.
But the prosecution was about to present a very compelling piece of evidence, hoping to sway the jury in its favor. In the months before the trial, Tommy Pope had prepared a video showing what would happen if a car like Susan's was allowed to roll down the boat ramp and sink in John D. Long Lake. The recreation was videotaped from the shore, while another camera was mounted in the car, roughly where Michael and Alex were sitting.
You got in your mind, well, it'll occur this way, or a car will drop like a rock, or it'll float forever, you know, all the different things. And ultimately, the byproduct of the testing, in addition to telling us some things about flotation characteristics, it gave us an internal view of how that car filled up with water, and basically gave us a view of what Michael and Alex would have been facing as the means of their death.
The defense objected to the video and requested that Judge Howard not let the jury see it. They claimed that the daylight and the divers floating in the water next to the car gave a false sense of rescue that Susan Smith, alone in the dark, would not have had. But the judge allowed it.
In the overall sense, what you're evaluating is relevance, whether or not something is relevant. When I looked at it, what was apparent was that within the car, the water coming up was much more slowly rising than it appeared from the exterior of the vehicle. Again, relevant now on the issue of just what could have been done to save the children and how long was the time frame in which something could have been done. And so it was at that point that I thought it really was relevant in that sentencing setting.
The jury sat and watched as it took the water almost 6 minutes to reach the level of the car's interior camera.
And that was kind of emotional for me. I didn't realize it would take a car that long to sink. Was it 5 minutes, 52 seconds, something like that? And they took all the sound away. What made it even more eerie, they took all the sound away in the courtroom. You just sitting there watching that car float out in the water. It was really emotional.
David and I watched the reenactment that was not shown to the court. We could sit and we watched it in the reflection of the windows because the blinds were drawn behind the jury, and we could sit there and watch it. It was very hard. It was heart-wrenching to watch that car just bob, and the front drop down and watch the car, because we just knew, you know, you could visualize Michael and Alex sitting there upside down, strapped in, nothing they could do.
Perhaps equally hard to watch was the testimony of the boy's father, David Smith, who described the monumental loss he had suffered when his children were murdered by his estranged wife.
Basically what we did was bring Michael and Alex back to life through David's testimony, with him telling about taking to the park and all the things that he'd done, and then having him relive their death. That's the first time in my career I'd ever broken down after testimony, and I talked to him and basically apologized to him for doing what we just had to do.
David's testimony had the courtroom in tears. Even Susan Smith, who throughout the trial had avoided all contact with her husband, whispered her apologies as she left.
She walked by and said, "I'm sorry." David just said it just infuriated him inside. You know, he was emotionally drained at that moment. It just infuriated him. She isn't sorry. I don't think she's sorry to this day.
The defense, hoping to counter the prosecution's emotional testimony, called friends, family, and social workers to testify on Susan's behalf. Her stepfather, Beverly Russell, took the stand, assuming responsibility for his sexual abuse of Smith and taking part of the blame for her actions.
The victim impact, so-called, ended up being much more in Susan's favor, because while David testified about his love for the children, so did everybody on Susan's side who were testifying for her. And it became clear that a death sentence was only going to increase the misery of the people who loved Michael and Alex Smith.
The jury agreed. On July 28th, after only 2.5 hours of deliberation, they unanimously voted to sentence Susan Smith to life in prison.
It was either death or life or innocent. So, you know, she obviously was not innocent. And I'd already made my mind up that based on the whole case, the death penalty wasn't warranted. So that was the only choice left.
I couldn't think it was all her fault. I mean, you know, it was, when it come right down to it, she was the one that did the one that committed murder, but several things leading up to that, that she could have been helped before all this came about.
the people that were closest to her probably could have helped her before then if they had chosen to, but they didn't. And so she was left to keep going in the wrong direction with no help.
Susan Smith was remanded to the Women's Correctional Center in Columbia, South Carolina. Under state law, she is eligible for parole after serving 30 years. For the defense team, it was a victory that spared Susan Smith's life. For the father of the victims, nothing short of death would have been justice.
Well, first of all, me and my family, of course, are disappointed that the death penalty wasn't the verdict, but the jury, again, we respect that they took the testimony among themselves and they came back with the verdict of life, and so they returned the verdict they thought was justice. Of course, like I said, we are disappointed, but it wasn't our choice on what penalty she was to receive.
American justice had rendered its verdict. But it's not the business of the law to answer the far tougher question of why a mother would murder her own children.
I can't say that any theory of why this horrible thing happened makes sense, because murdering your own children like that in love does not make sense. And we were really left just looking at what explanation was, made more sense than any other, or was less crazy than any other. Her confession said that she was trying to kill herself and to take the children with her in her disordered thinking, so they'd be in heaven and they'd be happy and would leave this veil of tears. And that's the way people who are acutely depressed sometimes think in a suicidal moment.
She made a conscious decision to stop, to get out, and to still make the car go on in the lake with 2 kids in the back. You know what I mean? It wasn't these random, I have to somehow save myself. You can armchair quarterback it to death now, but I really think that, again, I give the defense credit, but I don't buy it.
She deliberately, premeditatedly murdered Michael and Alex, slammed the door on them and let them roll. And I feel today that, even to this day, that justice was not done. The jury, they knew they were going to have to, in that time, and have to run into Linda Russell, run into somebody in that family, have them put her on death row. They were a county of cowards. There was no justice done in Union County for Michael and Alex.
Years after Susan Smith drowned her sons at John D. Long Lake, there was another tragedy at the exact same spot. In September 1996, a group of 10 people, including 6 children, drove to the shore of the lake in a van. They were there to see the memorials to the 2 Smith boys. They stopped. Some got out. Suddenly, the van, which had transmission problems, rolled down the very same slope into the lake. 7 people, including 4 of the children, were drowned. The bodies were recovered by the same divers who found Michael and Alex Smith. The deaths were ruled accidental. I'm Bill Curtis.
When the news about Andrea Yates broke, it shocked the nation. How could a mother have killed her 5 little children?
Andrea Yates is the sickest woman I have ever seen.
We never had a doubt that she knew right from wrong. Never.
I was told by people who saw her in those days that Andrea was a fabulous mother. We hero worshipped Andrea.
What were the forces that led her to commit these horrible acts?
We all go to hell, yeah!
She didn't have any ability to judge the rightness or wrongness of what this preacher was saying to her.
You are accountable for those children. No other people does God single out than children.
And in her world, there was no other way out for her children other than to send them to God.
Sometimes you just have to look at it and call it what it is. It's an evil act.
Andrea Yates, next on Mugshots. On June 20th, 2001, Houston police received a 911 call from a normally quiet section of town.
What's your name? What's the problem? I just need him to come. Is your husband there? No. Well, what's the problem? I need him to come. I need to know why we're coming, ma'am. Is he there standing next to you? She? Are you having a disturbance? Are you ill or what? Yes, I'm ill. You need an ambulance? No, I need a police officer. You have sent an ambulance.
Andrea Yates then called her husband Rusty, a project manager at NASA.
She said, come home. And he said, is anything wrong? And she said, yes. He said, with the kids? Yes. How many? She said, all of them.
When 2 police officers arrived at the house, Andrea confessed to her crimes.
The police showed up at her door, said, what's the problem? She said, I killed my children.
Andrea Yates had drowned her 5 children. Her husband Rusty arrived at the house shortly after the police.
Rusty falls to the ground, slams his hands into the grass. He then spent much time going from window to door, looking in, trying to see Andrea and saying, Andrea, how could you do this? How could you do this? I get a phone call from my sister, turn on the news, and I just couldn't believe it. I just cannot imagine the Andrea that I knew being capable of doing what she did to her own kids.
That Andrea may try to hurt the children, I mean, that never even entered my mind. Not my mind, not my mother's mind. I don't believe any of the family's mind that would ever happen.
The officers led her out the back door to avoid parading her past Rusty and took her to police headquarters in downtown Houston, where they questioned her.
After you drew the bathwater, what was your intent? What were you about to do?
During the 17-minute confession, Andrea Yates detailed what she had done.
This morning, what time was it that you got out of bed this morning?
At 8:10.
Okay. And who in your household was awake at that time?
My husband, and Mary, and Luke, and Paul.
We knew she started with Paul, who was the middle child, and she proceeded with Luke, killed him. We knew that she took John then from her statement and drowned him, put him in the bed. And then she drowned Mary, left Mary floating in the tub when she summoned Noah, the 7-year-old, in there.
For anyone to kill one child, to see that this child is dead, has died, to have that emotional effect and then go to the next child, it's just, it's hard to even imagine or put yourself in that person's position. How could anyone do that? Occurs to you.
The next day, Rusty shocked everyone by expressing sympathy for his wife.
I mean, I'm supportive of her. It's hard, you know, like I said, because, you know, I'm torn. One side of me, you know, blames her because she, you know, she did it, you know, but the other side of me says, well, she didn't because that wasn't her, you know, she wasn't in the right frame of mind, and I guess she had, you know, psychotic, you know, side effects with her depression that led her to do this.
Rusty revealed that Andrea had been battling a mental illness, leaving police and the public to ponder whether she was a cold-blooded killer or whether her actions were the result of a severe mental disease.
The only question she asked the whole time was, what are we going to plea? What type of plea, whether guilty or not guilty? And she indicated that she did not want to plea not guilty, that she wanted to go ahead and receive punishment because she was a bad mother.
She was the sickest person I've ever seen in my life. She was not bathed. She was dressed in this orange jail outfit. Her shirt was falling off of her. She didn't have a bra on. Her hair was hanging in her face, and she was shaking.
She had eyes that, when she looked at you, had no pupils. It was like shark's eyes. She could answer questions about what happened, but any sort of question about why or what's going on or what you're doing, it just sent her into an immediate never land.
My first thought was, this woman has postpartum psychosis.
Postpartum psychosis is a severe form of depression that affects 1 out of every 1,000 women after giving birth.
Usually the disorder takes the form of a delusion,
And the horrible tragedy of postpartum psychosis is that the delusion is about the child in most cases. I've seen women who are afraid to bathe their children for fear that they'll drown them. Women who have had thoughts of suffocating their children. Really horrible, horrible things.
While Andrea's lawyers were preparing for an insanity defense, the state was gathering evidence to prove that Andrea was criminally responsible for her actions.
Texas law is, does the person have a severe mental disease or defect? And if they do, as a result of that severe mental defect, were they able to tell that their actions were wrong, that their conduct was wrong at the time of the offense? We knew within a week that the evidence was telling us that she knew right from wrong at the time of the crime.
As people gather in front of the Yates house for a candlelight vigil 2 days after the murders, public opinion about Andrea Yates was growing stronger.
This was such a polarizing event. Either people had sympathy for Andrea and cared for her, or they hated her with every drop of blood in their bodies.
There are people all over Houston, including most of the talk show hosts, who would, oh, she knew what she was doing. Oh, she's just evil. Or, oh, they're terrible people. They just totally discounted the fact that Andrea was very, very sick.
A week after the murders, the legal posturing and the public outrage quieted down for the children's funeral.
It was such a typical hot, muggy, miserable Houston summer afternoon with probably a 20% chance of rain. It was so hot and miserable, every so often there would be a little drop of water from the trees, almost like the trees were weeping.
I went to the service at the church, but not to the burial. It was just a little too much for me to handle. I just wanted to think about my sister and the children on my own.
Andrea was undergoing a battery of psychiatric exams. She was put on antidepressant and antipsychotic medication. As she became more stable, she started to reveal disturbing reasons for the murders.
What were you trying to accomplish then when you did take your children's lives?
Maybe in their innocent years, God would take them up.
God would take them up to be in heaven, is that what you mean? All right. And if you had not taken their lives, what did you think would happen to them?
I guess they would have continued stumbling.
And where would they end up?
Hell.
In hell.
Wanting to know what Andrea meant by stumbling, the psychiatrist then asked her about her children's behavior.
What sort of things did they do which showed you they weren't right?
Well, they weren't, they just did a lot of silly stuff and didn't obey.
Didn't obey you when you told them to do things. All right. You mentioned their manners before. Can you give me an example of their manners?
Just when Rusty's mom would visit, they would not treat her well, call her names.
Be disrespectful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, you concluded that they were not righteous, and you're a religious person, and explain to me what you meant by not being righteous.
Well, they didn't do things God likes.
While Andrea's lawyers entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, the DA's office announced that they would be seeking the death penalty.
If this woman had gone into a neighbor's house and killed her 5 children and thought it was the best thing to do for those children to save those children because she felt those children weren't being raised in the right way, do you think anyone would have felt the way they do? What is it that you can, as a mother, take the lives of your own children, and because it's so horrific, people just don't want to think that that could be an evil act?
3 months after her arrest, a jury deemed Andrea Yates competent to stand trial. When we come back, was there something in Yates' background that could have led her to this horrible act?
Wait, why do I have a children's room? We're gonna get you somewhere, okay, child? We're gonna get you somewhere.
Andrea Yates grew up in Houston, where she was the youngest of 5 children of Andrew and Karen Kennedy.
She was my best friend from 8th grade through the end of college. A lot of people, when you're teenagers, you just think your family just is totally embarrassing. And I never got that from Andrea. I mean, she really was pretty devoted to her parents.
She was always wanting to help other people out. Elderly people in the neighborhood, just derived a lot of satisfaction out of wanting to do things for other people instead of people doing things for her.
In high school, she was the captain of the swim team, the historian of the National Honor Society, and graduated valedictorian of her senior class.
She wasn't satisfied with mediocre stuff. She wanted things to be excellent. I don't know about perfect, but she valued excellence.
After graduating from the University of Texas School of Nursing, Andrea moved into an apartment complex in the suburbs and began dating.
I don't think anybody ever would have pictured Andrea getting married and having 5 kids, because she never dated. She just never dated even once that I know of until we got out of college.
Rusty Yates, a computer systems designer for NASA, lived in the same apartment complex. He told his story to author Susie Spencer.
The first time he saw Andrea, she was floating in the swimming pool with her arms outstretched, almost like a cross. And he was listening to his radio sitting by the pool, just watching her and thinking, I could never have this woman. She is too good.
Andrea ignored Rusty that day, but a few months later, it was she who made the first move. The couple dated for 3 years before moving in together and eventually marrying.
And Rusty told me that Andrea did not like sex, that she would dress in the closet. He thought that once they got married, it would be okay. And Andrea still was always uncomfortable with sex and revealing her body.
After their wedding, Andrea continued working as a nurse at a nearby hospital. But before the couple celebrated their first wedding anniversary, Noah was born. And like many women, Andrea was faced with a critical decision, whether or not to go back to work.
There are many women who will say over and over that Andrea wanted to go back to work, that she really wanted to go into nursing again. And Rusty will say, no, she didn't. We talked about that. I gave her the option of going back to work, and she said, no, I'm a mom now. That's all that matters. That's all I want to do. What's the truth? I don't know, because Andrea was a people pleaser. So I think she would agree with whoever's talking at the moment.
I don't think Andrea regarded it as a problem that Rusty was the guy who would go to work and support them, and she's the one who would take care of the house. And she wanted that. She wanted the Ward and June Cleaver kind of lifestyle.
Andrea quit her job and appeared to adapt well to her role as a full-time mother. But defense psychiatrists maintained that at the time, something terrible was happening to her.
She had thoughts or visions of a knife and had thoughts about stabbing someone in blood. She thought she heard Satan speak to her after the birth of Noah.
Andrea decided to keep the incident a secret, and therefore the beginning signs of her illness went undiagnosed.
Andrea had to be perfect. The perfect student, the perfect daughter, the perfect nurse. So she could not reveal to anyone that she was having these visions.
But that's another typical Andrea thing, that she plays her cards close to the vest. If she doesn't feel like telling you something, no hint. No hint.
Oh, is that right?
Over the next 4 years, Andrea had 2 more sons, John and Paul.
You play with those balloons.
Meanwhile, Rusty and Andrea were following the teachings of a fire and brimstone street preacher Rusty had met in college.
God is going to destroy this earth and all you wretched sinners.
Michael Warrenecki and his wife Rachel corresponded with their followers mostly through letters and videos. The former college football player and former cheerleader were routinely in trouble with local authorities for their aggressive preaching style, and ultimately left their home state of Michigan to avoid prosecution. The couple took their ministry on the road, and for 3 decades have traveled across the U.S. and 23 other countries with their 6 children, preaching their own brand of Christianity on street corners and at college campuses.
When I first discovered that they were a part of Michael Warrenecki's system, I knew exactly that. She went through what I went through.
Like Rusty, David de la Isla was in college when he met Michael Warrenecki. He followed the preacher for 12 years.
We all go to hell! Yes! To hell!
In Mike's teaching, he constantly says that only a few make it. So the red light went off with me, and I started becoming very suspicious at the notion that there's many people who come to salvation, not just a few, as he teaches.
Warrenecki preached an austere lifestyle, and de la Isla believes it is this instruction that encouraged Rusty and Andrea to move from their suburban house to a mobile home in the nearby campground.
Hey there, boys.
In the teachings of Michael Warrenecki, to hold a job and to even live in a home is to participate in the evil satanic conspiracy against God. So, you know, for Rusty to get his family in this mobile home and to kind of emulate this nomadic lifestyle, it comes directly from the teachings of Michael Warrenecki.
By the time Rusty and Andrea had their third son, it was Andrea who had developed the stronger relationship with the Warreneckis, corresponding regularly with them.
Then they see in a Warrenecki newsletter that the Warreneckis have a bus for sale, a used Greyhound bus.
Rusty and Andrea bought the converted bus and downsized again, moving with their 3 young children from their mobile home to the 350-square-foot bus.
This small bus that the children were being raised in, the amount of children back to back to back, one after another, my mother and I knew that it took its toll on my sister.
Meanwhile, she was also helping to care for her father, who was suffering from Alzheimer's.
The people at the RV park will say, we knew something was wrong. We were saying, Rusty, help her. Rusty will talk about that we had clear lines of responsibility. I was the breadwinner. Andrea was to take care of the kids.
Andrea remained in contact with the Warreneckis.
You don't need to listen to someone tell you hateful things.
He's like a doctor. He diagnoses your spiritual state by what you write him. He encourages you to describe where you are with God, and then he responds back to you in a written letter, diagnosing and picking out your flaws.
From the letters I have that Rachel Warrenecki wrote to Andrea, it was, you are evil, you are wicked, you are a daughter of Eve, who is a wicked witch. You know, the window of opportunity for us to minister to you is closing. You have to repent now.
Mike believes that all women inherit a witchcraft nature from Eve and have this spirit of Jezebel, so they should be the servant of a man, and man should have, you know, dominance over the woman.
Jesus does single out one group: children.
Warrenecki's writings were particularly judgmental when it came to raising children. He believes today's mothers are too permissive.
Modern Mother Worldly was very, very lazy. All her children drove her crazy. The Bible told her to spank and train them, but society said she must never constrain them. The fruit of rebellion she did now see. On the day of judgment she will have no plea. Modern Mother Worldly, cast in hell. Now what becomes of the children of such a Jezebel? This ties specifically with Andrea and what really, I think, gave her the notion that her kids are going to go to hell. What becomes of the children of the Jezebel? She's the Jezebel.
Shortly before her 35th birthday, Andrea had her 4th child, Luke.
Here we are on our way home. Here's our expedition. Luke.
When Luke was 4 months old, Rusty got a call similar to the one he would get the day of the murders.
Andrea calls Rusty at work and says, come home, I need help. So he runs from NASA out to the RV park with the 350-square-foot bus, walks in and says, what's the matter? Andrea is sitting there chewing her fingers, not biting her fingernails, chewing her fingers. Her legs are trembling, her arms are shaking. She says, I need help.
Andrea Yates had suffered a nervous breakdown. Next, on Mugshots, Andrea and Rusty decide to get help, but her descent continues.
H-I-J-K-L-M-N-O.
Oops. P.
B.
Then what?
Dada-oo.
No.
G-O-N-T-U-V. Dada-oo. W-X-Y-N-Z. Now I know my ABCs. Won't you come and play with me?
By the summer of 1999, Andrea Yates' life was in turmoil. She was caring for her ailing father, homeschooling her 3 older boys, and nursing her new infant, all the while living in a 350-square-foot bus and corresponding with the Warreneckis.
But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to stumble, it is better for him that a heavy
Are you gonna tell me what's going on? Come on, Marcus, what do you mean what's going on? Why are we here? We're sneaking into my girlfriend's room. How's Steve gonna come up? What? I'm in. What do we do? Does Steve even need to come? He snuck in. I snuck in.
Breathing kills 7 million people a year. What the flip? How?
Hi, do you want to learn how to draw amazing art? Would you like to learn how to draw straight out of your head and start wowing everyone around you? Then this is your course in drawing, from beginner to advanced. Drawing is the most sought after skill when it comes to any artistic job, and the skill
A dad has dished out some cold hard justice to his bully son, but did he go too far? Hello and welcome back to I.O. I'm your host for the day, Rebecca Felgate, and today we're talking about a dad's harsh punishment. Now many people are saying it fit the crime, but other people are saying, actually, you know what, it was a bit mean. Before we jump into the video, I would love for you guys to leave me a comment about bullying. Have you ever been bullied? Were you ever a bully? What would you do if you caught your child bullying someone else? I'm actually pretty excited to read these comments. Okay, so a dad in Florida found his 13-year-old son had been bullying one of his fellow classmates. Jacob attends New Smyrna Beach Middle School and is at that age where bullying is rife. On finding out his son was a bully, Dad Michael Yager went one step further than most parents. Instead of doling out the classic punishments like, you know, grounding him or marching the kid over to the other kid's house to apologize, Michael made Jacob a big old billboard outlining his wrongdoing. Not only that, he made him wear it. But not only did he make him wear it, he made him wear it by the side of a busy road. The sign read, "I'm a bully, honk if you hate bullies." Of course, some drivers by did honk, others stopped to talk to Jacob and his dad. Michael spoke to Florida's Wesh News and said, "I figured it would teach him a lesson that would embarrass him and make him feel how the kids feel." A lot of people have been questioning if this was the best reaction though, with the old saying 2 wrongs don't make a right definitely jumping to mind. Now Michael admitted that some people who pulled over were not pleased with the way that he'd handled the situation. He said, "I had one woman come up and call me every name in the book. In my mind, I thought I was doing the right thing, but I guess you can't please everyone." I guess it's not about pleasing people though, it's about doing the right thing for your child. Now New Smyrna Beach Middle School gave some reasonable advice. They said, you never know what's going through someone's mind. They recommended if someone is feeling the urge to be a bully, then they should speak to a guidance counselor. Now that sounds all very well and good, but 13-year-olds aren't really ones for self-reflection, or not a lot of them anyway. Perhaps it ought to be up to the school to identify who's bullying and then maybe send them to the guidance counselor. I guess to make matters even more humiliating for Jacob, his punishment was caught on camera. As we know, in the age of social media, these things never really go away. Does he deserve to be constantly humiliated every time the footage resurfaces? NBC New York tweeted the story.
I'm Levi, I'm co-founder of Electric Longboards. We started the business as college students. The Colangelo College of Business will do anything they can to help you be successful.
I'm Nathan, and I'm co-founder of Electric Longboards. GC is a very entrepreneurial-minded college. We were able to go into the Lopes lab and use their 3D printers to prototype the board. I found my purpose because I figured out what I love to do.
Find your purpose at Grand Canyon University.
private, Christian, affordable. Visit gcu.edu.
She vanished from her home.
She gave me a hug and told me she loved me. And that's the last time I seen her.
Leaving behind so many unanswered questions. Did 15-year-old Megan Nichols simply run away?
Basically, it said, "Mom, I love you, but I'm never going to be happy here."
Or did someone make her disappear?
That's the last person that Megan did try to reach that night.
And what was she doing at the bank?
And sure enough, Megan was at the ATM on that day.
The answer to at least two of those questions may lie in this rural Illinois field. A spot where a couple just made a major discovery, one that could finally help crack this case. Crime Watch Daily first told you about Megan Nichols 2 years after she had disappeared from her mother's home in the tiny town of Fairfield, population 5,200.
My relationship with Megan was very close. We did everything together.
It was 4th of July weekend. Fireworks, barbecues, and for Megan, a little bike ride. One that would take on new meaning in the hours to come.
She said, "Do you care if I go on a bicycle ride?" And I said, "I don't care. Just don't be doing anything you're not supposed to be doing."
After getting back from her ride, Megan and her mother, Kathy Jo Hutchcraft, go shopping, but Megan cuts things short.
She told me she didn't feel good, and she wanted to go home.
Kathy Jo drops her daughter off at home, and Megan says she's going to go to bed.
And she gave me a hug and told me she loved me.
Kathy Jo heads back out to finish her shopping. She's gone an hour.
And I just got this sick feeling that I needed to go check on Megan. And I went upstairs and she was gone. I just knew. I knew it was bad. I immediately called my mom.
Kathy Jo and her mother look for clues.
We went back upstairs, and I pulled her blanket back. And that's when I found her phone. And when I picked it up, oh, my heart sank. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is real.
The phone has been wiped clean. All photos, messages, contacts, any and every sign of Megan deleted.
I just started crying. I'm like, I don't know what to do. And my mom said, well, we're going to pray. So we went into Megan's other room and we knelt down to pray. And there was a note.
It's from Megan.
Basically, it said, "Mom, I love you, but I'm never going to be happy here. Don't come looking for me because why spend a lifetime looking for somebody who doesn't want to be found?"
Then, with those harsh words still lingering, Kathy Jo gets a lead.
A friend had messaged me, "Have you checked the bank accounts?" No, I hadn't. So I got online and I checked the bank accounts, and sure enough, money had been withdrawn on July the 3rd around 2:00 p.m.
Remember that bike ride Megan asked her mom if she could go on?
Sure enough, Megan was at the ATM on that day. We've seen that video.
A final glimpse.
And that's the last time I seen her.
A final glimpse.
And that's the last time I seen her.
Megan's family offers up evidence of the phone and the note to police. Her mom also tells investigators about a boy Megan has been seeing.
Fairly soon before her disappearance, Megan was seeing a young man.
One her mother didn't approve of, for many reasons, including, she says, he was cheating on her.
I'd had it at that point. He's using her and you, and you're done. You're 15, he's 18, this is over.
But she knew it wasn't over. And when Kathy Jo received the cell phone records from the day her daughter disappeared, the proof would be in black and white.
The last 3 calls, I want to say, that she made before she disappeared or supposedly ran away from home were made to this boy.
That boy, whose father is an Illinois state policeman, responded to the rumors he was somehow involved in Megan's disappearance on his Facebook page, writing in part, "Okay, this has gone on long enough. I had nothing to do with this. And that I have nothing to hide. I shouldn't even have to defend myself if I'm not involved." And police agreed, saying he was not considered a suspect. Nearly 2 more years would pass when just a few months ago, a Fairfield resident who happens to know Megan's mom would provide the biggest piece of evidence in this case since the teen disappeared.
It made me sick. Like my stomach turned.
Jackie Beck and her boyfriend were out cutting up firewood on this rural farm, just a few miles south, and were wrapped in a blanket. The FBI would later confirm it was Megan Nichols.
It's hard enough to find something, like that, but turn around that you know the person, it's just 10 times worse.
Police are not revealing any details on how Megan may have died, simply calling it an ongoing investigation. One chapter is now finally closed. Others remain open, and Megan's mother is now left with only sweet memories.
It's not unlike Megan to come down the stairs singing. I still look for her. She should still be there.
If you have any information on her disappearance, you're asked to call the Fairfield Police Department. That number is 1-618-842-2151. Or you can submit a tip at crimewatchdaily.com. I'm Chris Hansen. If you like this story, make sure you tune in every day to Crime Watch Daily. You can find where the show airs in your city at crimewatchdaily.com.
So the number one question we get is,
hey, what's up, you guys? A long time no talk, I know. First of all, I'm just gonna say, don't mind my voice if it sounds really weird. I'm literally sick for, I think, the 3rd time this year. So I don't know what's going on with that, but please don't mind my voice if it sounds a little off. And I know I haven't been around for a couple weeks, but that's just because school has really been hectic. I just finished my semester and I have exams coming up next week and the following week, so I'm going to be pretty busy. In today's video, we're going to be talking about everything wrong with Danielle Kahn. But more specifically, this video is going to be focusing on her age, because I know in my Everything Wrong with Danielle Kahn Part 1 video, I briefly mentioned that she may be lying about her age, but I said that I don't really think it's true. But upon reading and watching some stuff about the topic, I do think that it's true. So I'm going to be talking to you guys about that today. Oh, and I just wanted to say that my Instagram DMs are open, so if you guys want to come say hi, if you need any advice, I'm going to be responding to DMs every single night at 9 p.m. EST. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So as many of you may know, a lot of places on the internet, such as Famous Birthdays, advertise Danielle as being 14, being born on March 7th, 2004. Upon first looking at this, it's believable. There's no reason why it would be fake or why she would be lying. So that being said, a lot of people would just, I guess, believe that she's 14. One of the biggest pieces of evidence that people have found as to why she may be a lot younger than she says she is because of her beauty pageant competitions. So Danielle, as many of you may know, participated, I don't know if she still does, but she participated in beauty pageants, and in 2014 she won Miss Florida Junior Preteen. So I decided to take a look at the National American Miss website. I think that's what it's called. And this is for the pageant information for Florida. And also keep in mind that these are the contestants' ages as of January 1st. So I don't know if this plays a role in it, but I'm just going to be assuming that the ages are the same as they were in 2014. Please correct me if I am wrong. But as you can see, the Miss Florida Junior Preteen ages are 7, 8, and 9. So taking a look at this information, I guess the oldest we could say she was 9 when she was competing for Miss Florida Junior Preteen. That means that she would technically be 13 right now and not 14, which is only a 1-year age difference. That being said, we're going to take a quick look at her previous pageant results. So in 2012, she competed in Miss Florida Princess. And as you can see, to compete in Miss Florida Princess, you have to be 4, 5, and 6. So even if Danielle was the oldest age that you can be to compete in the Miss Florida Princess, which is 6, and she competed in 2012, that means that she would have at least been born in 2006, which makes her 12. But we also need to take into account that Danielle also competed in Miss Florida Princess in 2013, which means that she would have been 5 in 2012 and 6 in 2013. And that means that she was born in 2007. So, just to put this all into perspective, and if you guys are a little confused, in 2012 and 2013, she competed in Miss Florida Princess, and you have to be at least 4, 5, and 6. And then in 2014, she went up to compete for Miss Florida Junior Preteen, and you have to be 7, 8, and 9. This means that she was born in 2007, which means that she was 5 in 2012, which means that she was at least 11 years old last year and turned 12 this year.
Because by the looks and sounds of it, birth certificate, bro, but that's what I'm saying is that shit's never been posted. Birth certificate, bro, but have y'all actually seen her actual fucking birth certificate? Because last time I checked, the birth certificate...
Do you have what it takes to be a 21st century designer? Make your passion your career.
Actual fucking birth certificate. Because last time I checked, the birth certificate that was posted by her own grandmother said she was 11. Like, what the fuck? Is there proof she's 11? Dude, there's so much proof. So much proof. So much. An unbelievable amount. Target changed her age. This is what I'm saying. How the fuck does Target mess up on an age? Like real ass shit. Real shit. How in the fuck does Target just mess up on one person's age? Like,
also, I just want to mention I can't find any proof of this birth certificate that was posted, and also supposedly her aunt posted a pic of her when she was turning 9, and this was 2 years ago, which means she would be 11 or 12 today, but I can't find any like physical screenshots of this. A lot of people say it happened, but I don't know how much we can rely on that information